So hello, I'm Amanda Coulson and I'm the Executive Director of the VOLTA fairs in Basel and New York. My background is actually completely different. So my background, I was trained in New York and I went to the Institute of Fine Arts here where I got my master's in history of art. So it was very traditional. I studied 16th century painting. So I come from a very serious, critical background, and I kind of slowly found my way into contemporary art through various different avenues. I was a writer for a long time, and I still am. So I'm an art critic, and that was my first sort of steps into contemporary, was really writing about it. And then that led to curating, and those were my areas of interest. And for me, really how I fell into the art fair world, because it was really somehow accidental, it wasn't planned, really, was that I was just with a group of colleagues, the 3 dealers from Berlin, Chicago, and Frankfurt. And we were talking about the art fair model and what it allowed us. And for me, what was, as a critic and as somebody who was sort of deeply into the business, I suppose, I felt that at the major fairs, I very rarely made discoveries. So it was always great to go, and I would see things that were really interesting and museum level quality, but I was rarely making a discovery of a new artist. And so I thought it would be good to have a fair that would offer that opportunity to not have to go do a lot of studio visits or whatever and make discoveries. Now obviously Lista already existed at the time, and that was really the first of all the satellite fairs. It was like the mother of all satellite fairs. But the model that Lista had back then anyway was that it had an age limit. And I don't know if it was because I was close to turning 40, but I felt like that was a strange way to categorize, that originality and creativity and freshness had an age limit. And it doesn't. I mean, we've seen artists hitting their stride in their 50s, like even Marilyn Minter recently, who's become huge, but that started for her when she was 55. For whatever reason, or I don't know, Louise Bourgeois, she was already well known, but to say that an artist can only be new and original when they're under 40 seemed to be not wrong, but just closing the market off to a certain segment. So we sort of identified that, and then there was the age limit of the galleries. So the galleries had to be under 5 years old, which again is it's a good way to make a profile for a fair. So Lista has a really clear profile of what it wants, and it does it very well. But it excludes a whole pool of talented artists and galleries that just don't fit into those requirements and maybe aren't ready yet to go to a main fair or don't want to go to a main fair. And there's that discussion as well. So we sort of saw that niche, and we just really thought, oh hey, let's do this project, let's get together and invite our friends. And we didn't see it as being a long-term career plan. We just thought we thought it would be a 3-year project, and then we would just move on to do whatever else. And we seemed to hit a nerve, and then when we hit that nerve, it became a bigger deal, and the fair grew, and voila. And so that's how I sort of ended up doing it. Focusing on solo booths was about, we also already tried in Basel, in the Basel fair, to sort of strip it down a little bit. When we started the fair and there was 23 galleries, having 4 or 5 artists in a booth wasn't really a problem, but as the fair began to grow, I felt like we were going in the direction that the other fairs already had, which is that you sort of get to a certain level and you're just exhausted. You've just seen too much and you can't really take any more in. And so we thought about how we could curate it down even more. We talk about VOLTA being a curated fair, which is sort of an oxymoron, but it's really just about the choices we make and the selection. So the solo project fair was really to put the focus back also on the artists, because another thing about a lot of art fairs is, and it still happens, it's all about the gallery list. And people say, oh, your fair looks great this year, and they've seen the gallery list. And I'm like, well, actually, how do you know? Maybe it's all, come see it first. So it was also about sort of what's the fair about? Yes, it's about selling and it's about a market, but it's about the producers. So to do a solo project fair was really about giving the artists somehow not more control, but more respect. I think it's very hard for an artist in a fair when they're one of 6. It always makes them feel very uncomfortable. And the other point was really when we were invited to come to New York by our parent company, because at that point we had been bought by a larger corporation, and they wanted us to come to New York, and my first reaction was like, no, why? Why should we go to New York? There's 5 satellite fairs there already. What can we bring? What can we actually bring? Because I'm not interested in just being there to kind of catch the overflow. I think you need to bring something to the table that's not being done. So the solo project idea for New York was to really work in tandem with the Armory, who's our partner, And they don't have a statement section like in Basel. They don't really have a section for young galleries and for unknown artists. There are a few scattered in. So we thought, okay, let's do that. We're partners. Let's bring something that links us but makes us separate. And so it was really to bring that to the table and to do something sort of complementary. And I think the solo project idea offers something completely different because it's so unlike other fairs, and quite often the artists are there because they've installed, they've had really something to do with it, they feel so much more involved than when they're just one of a list. And so a lot of people have said, curators have said, oh, this is great, you know, it's like 83 studio visits. I can do it all in one day. And I think that adds a different dimension to the fair. So my background as a critic certainly changes because I do know a lot of backstory on a lot of the artists. And when we're sitting in the board meeting, because I've been traveling as a critic or looking at shows, I actually bring a lot to the table, or I say, oh no, well you missed that and you should know this about it. And we have a lot of dialogues about that because, you know, we have curators on the board, that we're not just, you know, looking at the gallery name and the city and their list of artists and that's how we make our decision. We do bring quite a lot more in. And one time I actually made the experiment of, in the first round, for the curatorial board to look at all the applications without the name of the gallery and without the city, just to see how we scored them, actually not knowing who the gallery was representing them. Because it's amazing how much your opinion changes based on the fact that they are represented by X or Y. I don't know, I think the model of an art fair is a very traditional one, and it's serving a very basic purpose. Nobody really wants to talk about it, but it's a trade show. That's what it is, it's a trade show. And I think that has to continue because the galleries are there for a certain reason. But I do think that the way a lot of fairs are changing and trying to bring a slightly more creative way of doing it to the table is making it a more interesting experience. I don't know how long the model is going to go on the way it's been the last few years. I think there are a lot of fairs and it is very difficult for all of them to provide enough for all the attendees. It's sort of impossible if you have 20 fairs that everyone's going to do well. And ultimately we have to think about how we're serving our client, and our client is actually the gallery. As much as we cater to the visitors and the VIPs and the collectors, the people that are actually our clients are the galleries, and the most important thing is to provide them the service they're paying for. And it's hard to say if this model is going to go on because it is becoming very expensive, of course, for a lot of galleries, and especially galleries at the level that I'm dealing with. So it might be we have to find more creative ways of doing things. But I think one of the things that I try to do at VOLTA, which is again informed by the work I do, is try to provide platforms for artists, not just, you know, we're supposed to be the emerging art fair, and we are, but also artists that have been somehow overlooked for what I feel is no good reason, you know, because they just had a baby and were off the scene for 2 years or whatever it might be, or became a junkie, or, you know, just didn't hit their stride. And somehow they've been overpassed, and so they're still emerging even though they've been around much longer. So I think, for example, one person we're going to be having at the fair this year is Deborah Grant, who's an artist from New York, originally Canadian, who was in the freestyle show with so many people who are household names now. And for whatever reason, you know, because, you know, I won't even make the guess why, she didn't have the same trajectory as, say, Kahinda Wiley, who everyone knows and is sort of fabulous. And I think that's, you know, so I'd like to revisit that and say, well, hey, let's take a look again. Why could that be? You know, or this artist actually does deserve this solo platform. So I think she's somebody who's really interesting, and I'm happy to see. And we've also had positions of even dead artists that people missed when they were alive, for whatever reason. Not at this, but like Anna Oppenheimer is a very interesting artist. She was a German installation artist in the 70s and 80s, and she died very young. And she's someone who's not in the sort of history of art at all, but is really amazing and was doing really incredible installations in the 80s when everybody was doing all this big gestural painting. And I'm trying to think who else. I don't know. I mean, there's so many new galleries all the time doing interesting stuff, and it's really hard to kind of come up with a list and say, oh yeah, you should go look at this one and that one. So maybe I won't.